As many of you probably know, the Megalithomania Conference was founded by Hugh Newman, John Martineau, and Gareth Mills in late 2005. This means that the conference is now about 16 years old. It's not only survived its first baby steps, but grown and developed and become stronger and taller and deeper. It's got a defined identity and message. It's just about grown up now. The last couple of years have been a challenge for us all during the pandemic. Last year, the conference had to be canceled altogether, and this year's Megalithomania has gone ahead as a purely online event, but I believe that the choice and quality of the presentations has remained excellent. I would like to thank Hugh, John, and Gareth for having launched Megalithomania and for keeping this crazy ship afloat even in bad weather. As we sometimes say here in the UK, well done, you. Anyway, I'm here to introduce the John Michell Memorial Lecture, which has been part of the Megalithomania Conference since John passed away in 2009. I collaborated with John on a few projects and was his friend for about 20 years. A few of the speakers at this year's conference have referenced John's influence on them through his writings, conversations, and his general personal guidance. This year, the memorial lecture will be delivered by Hugh Newman, who by now needs no introduction, conference organizer, tour leader, author, explorer, and all-around good person. I'm looking forward to it, and with a special feeling of completing a spiral loop, growing upward. Anyway, the image that you see next to me is a watercolor painting by John Michell of what he calls the New Jerusalem diagram. This is a geometrical layout of the proportions of Stonehenge. This diagram was the guiding light of all his work, and he kept at it and its implications throughout his life. I'm placing it here as a symbol of the very essence of John's message. Hugh will tell you more about it in his talk. Anyway, Hugh, John, and Gareth took the name of the conference from the title of a book by John Michell, Megalithomania, which came out in the early 1980s. The aim of this book is to bring to light the different fashions in antiquarianism, the interpretation of the ancient stones and monuments, the changing myths of the times, the shifting trends and ways of seeing. He begins his account with William Stukely, born in the late 17th century. His way of seeing the stones involved visions of serpent temples in Avebury and sacred symbols laid out over large areas of the landscape by the Druids. This vision provided great inspiration to the poet and artist William Blake. According to Michell, Stukely was the priest and William Blake the prophet of a mystical way of seeing the stones. Michell then moves through the centuries with accounts of Stukely's arch rival, Thomas Hobbes, and then John Aubrey, Inigo Jones, John Constable, Norman Lockyer, John Thomas Blight, Alexander Thom, and many, many others. According to Michell, and here I quote, Stukely created a myth so well founded that it has endured to this day, by which Stonehenge became a temple of the ancestral Druids and a prime symbol of national culture. His myth succeeded because it was in accordance with tradition on two levels, popular and poetic. Generations of academics since Stukely have tried to stamp out the popular notion which associates megalithic monuments with Druids, but in vain. And on the literary level, Stukely's picture of a magical civilization in far antiquity is in the same line of esoteric tradition which, as Kathleen Rain points out in her work on Blake, has always inspired poets, despite the disapproval of their academic commentators. On the other hand, according to the rival myth, megalithic monuments were merely places of burial or superstitious rites by unknown savages. And again, the modern tendency has been to invest Stukely's ancient sages with further qualities by representing them as skillful astronomers, geomancers, dowsers, and to attribute to the sites of their monuments certain geological or magnetic properties which mark them out as natural centers of magical operations. And Michell concludes his book, Megalithomania, with these words. Through their folklore and legends, the works of the megalith builders are everywhere associated with ancient knowledge of the earth and its spirit. From those legends, supported by modern research, there is now emerging a new myth of the Stone Age as a time when the interests of the living earth were closely studied and held sacred. That this myth largely reflects modern ecological concerns is undoubted, but it is nonetheless tenable for all that. And those who share those concerns may welcome the new theory of antiquity, which provides so useful a model for harmonious relations between this earth and the science of the future. I will leave it up to Hugh to give an idea of the scope of John's writings and influence. These had a great impact on the young people of the 60s and 70s, and as Hugh tells me, it continues to this day. Hugh, I leave it to you.
Thank you, Christine. I really appreciate the introduction. Obviously, I'm a huge fan of John Michell, and he really is the original Megalithomaniac. And this is actually an image of him sitting outside the assembly rooms, and you can see what he's got in his hand there. It was a good favorite pastime of his. And I just want to let people know, because quite a few people are quite new. They're coming on the online conference from various places around the world. Now, John Michell was born in 1933, died in 2009. And he was a visionary, antiquarian, a polymath, a philosopher, poet, artist, a radical traditionalist, and fundamentally a megalithomaniac, the first megalithomaniac. And here's a selection of his books, some of the ones that have inspired me over the years. And it really was the work of actually Hamish Miller and Paul Broadhurst that introduced me to his work. And I want to talk about them in a moment. But probably his most influential book, in my opinion, is The View Over Atlantis. Now, this came out originally in 1969. I wasn't around then. And it's been through multiple editions. And it got properly published about 3 years after this. And in it, he kind of created a revolution and manifested the Earth Mysteries movement and reinvigorated the ley hunting movement that had appeared previously in the 1920s and 30s, which was created by Alfred Watkins. And he brought this whole new dimension of understanding the sacred landscape to light. He'd previously published a book called The Flying Saucer Vision, where he started introducing some of these themes. And this, when I eventually came around to reading this after I'd been through the work of Hamish Miller and Paul Broadhurst, it really made me realize that much of the stuff I was interested in and people have been writing and talking about for decades, right up until the 2000s, were heavily influenced by John Michell and this particular book, and obviously some of his other books, or all of his other books as well. So before I get into a couple of strands of what really inspires me about John Michell, I'm going to just read this quote from The View Over Atlantis. This is actually put together from 2 pages in the original View Over Atlantis, and it came together as one piece in the new View Over Atlantis. A great scientific instrument lies sprawled over the entire surface of the globe. At some period, perhaps it was over 4,000 years ago, almost every corner of the world was visited by a group of men who came with a particular task to accomplish. With the help of some remarkable power by which they could cut and raise enormous blocks of stone, These men created vast astronomical instruments, circles of erect pillars, pyramids, underground tunnels, cyclopean alignments whose course from horizon to horizon was marked by stones, mounds, and earthworks. The vast scale of prehistoric engineering is not yet generally recognized. And this is most certainly the case when it comes to, you know, the work of John. And he kind of, this was, to me, this was like a guiding principle, this actual quote from his original book. A few years later, he published The Old Stones of Land's End, and this has been my guidebook for whenever I go down there. And he instigated and analyzed quite scientifically all the stones and monoliths and alignments down in the Land's End part of Cornwall, and even got an introduction or a dedication, I think, from Prince Charles at the time. And so this was really interesting, and he really started to challenge academia. And he kind of, over the years, he kind of became frustrated with academia. And fortunately, I've got a few video clips of a rare interview I'm going to share with you now. This was recorded back in 2007. This was became part of the Megalithomania. It was actually played partly as part of a film at the Megalithomania conference. So this is, if it works properly, this is John Michell talking about the old stones of Land's End and some interesting theories about Cornwall.
Well, I did the book The Old Stones of Land's End because in the previous books, View over Atlantis and such, I'd been investigating and interested in alignments of sites, and then the straight lines in which they stand for some reason. And I thought I'd take just one small area, a pretty self-contained area, which is the Land's End district, the far west of Cornwall, where I think there's probably a denser concentration of megalithic sites, old stones and stone circles and dolmens and such. There's probably a higher concentration of them there in this small area than anywhere else. And there are other areas which have quite a density of stones, but in that Land's End district it's a smaller area and most concentrated, and the stones have been, well, they've been very well disturbed over the years by miners and farmers and such, but there was enough left to see the sort of skeleton of an alignment system between them. And in that book I just surveyed all the megalithic sites I could find, and found quite a few others during the course of investigation, and then analysed the alignments through them. And that was the subject of a paper to the Royal Society of Statisticians, when they found, not surprising to me, they found that there was more alignments that could be expected by a chance model. So I just wanted to prove the fact of alignments, which at that time was very seriously challenged, and people didn't believe it at all. The archaeologists didn't even like to look at it, actually. But with that said, I think it made it so you couldn't ignore the fact of the matter. Some areas are dense with megaliths, and other areas are fairly deprived of them. It's nearly always in rocky country where, of course, the stones are available, and where perhaps there's a higher concentration of telluric energies or something like that. But they're usually in the lonelier and more rugged country, and possibly because in the farming areas they've largely been removed. Wherever you look, there are traditions of certain monuments with traditions around them. That's in every county, in every part of Britain, and perhaps every part of the world, of the old world. So it's difficult to know why certain places are particularly rich in megalithic monuments and remains. As I say, they are largely the lonelier, more remote, more rugged country. Like the Land's End is a high plateau built on granite, so stones are readily available there. And then sometimes they use quartz stones. And there's a stone circle in Cornwall which is entirely made of white quartz. And some of the significant stones in the circles seem to have been chosen to be marked by a particular kind of stone, a quartz stone or something outstanding. Dulo, East Cornwall near Plymouth. Yeah, lovely circle. And all the stones are like teeth, like white quartz stones. And nearby is a holy well, and there's other monuments in the district. They're largely the folklore associates them with divination, that is prophecy and fortunes, with healing and with fertility. And they're the gifts of the traditional gifts of the earth spirit. And then together with the alignments, you can tell then at what day of the year the monument became, or the stone became active and gave whatever benefits it was supposed to give.
So that was a lovely part of an interview that was put together. That was filmed by Giles Bryant, and the interview carried out by Emma Stoner, which was screened partly at Megalithomania back in 2007. So we're delighted to have that for you today, parts of it for you today. But it was The Sun and the Serpent, Hamish Miller and Paul Broadhurst. This is, when I read that book many years ago, it was this book that changed my direction in life, mainly, and it introduced me, because the introduction was by John Michell, and the alignment itself that is based upon the St. Michael line was discovered by John Michell, way back in 1969, and published in The View Over Atlantis. But some of the theories he put in The View Over Atlantis were talking about earth energies, feng shui, these dragon lines through the landscape, and that is what really got me, and especially in The Sun and the Serpent, where Paul and Hamish tracked this remarkable alignment through the landscape. And John also wrote about some of these themes in the brilliant The Earth Spirit book. And yes, so the St. Michael line is a very, very interesting alignment. I'm not going to go into too much detail today. I want to just summarize some aspects that really influenced me for over the years, and others. But this is the alignment, and it marks some very important sites all the way up. It's a Beltane sunrise alignment going sort of east-northeast, and Samhain sunset alignment going in the other direction. It takes in places like Avebury, Glastonbury, very important sites in Cornwall and so forth. And it became this kind of legendary kind of trackway or lay through the landscape. And this is the map. The main map here is the dowsed version, and what they found was they found two energy currents weaving in and around it, a male and female, which they called Michael and Mary, and it went through. It met at many of the sites on the main alignment, but also took in many others. And John really found the original alignment by realizing that Glastonbury Tor and Borough Mump, which is a few miles away, were kind of aligned to each other, and they look very similar, although Borough Mump's much smaller. But what got me really interested in after the Son of the Serpent was the fact that I lived near Cherry Hinton in Cambridge, and there's a site called Wandlebury, which fascinated me, and the Mary line went through Wandlebury. So I immediately began dowsing. I got taught dowsing very early. Eventually I met Sean Kerwin, who taught me properly, and I was tracking this line all through the landscape and getting highly excited about it and realizing there's something to this. And now, a lot of people think dowsing, it's, you're finding things that aren't there and things like this. And that may be the case in some cases. And we'll look at some aspects of that later. But also, John was very interested in crop circles. And as you can see marked on the map there, a couple of very important, very interesting crop circles appeared on the Mary line next to Wandlebury in 2001, summer of 2001. And you can see both of them here. One of them famously became called the Angel Crop Circle. But even before that, in 1991, this is the Mandelbrot set. And this occurred strangely on the Michael line, the Michael energy line, apparently. And this, John was very into it. He founded the Seriologist magazine. He was editor of that for several issues before he got taken over by other people. And when the crop circles started appearing in the 80s and 90s, it was really one of John's kind of favorite subjects, because it kind of was like a manifestation of the earth spirit. It connected with the flying source of vision and the ideas he had then. And we've got a brief bit of the video of him just discussing the early days of that just here. So we'll just leave this on for a few minutes. And he really saw them as agents of change, you know, like what was happening in the 1960s and 70s. It was like a resurgence of that.
It's different to know one thing leads to another. It's different to know what leads to what. But I had a passing and then a more serious interest in the UFO phenomenon back in the middle of the 1960s, when something was happening which was changing people's minds and lives and giving people experiences which couldn't be unexplained, and yet the authorities were paying no attention to it, as if nothing was happening at all. And then somehow just the appearance of UFOs and the rumours about them stirred up minds, and to me they indicated some connection with ancient sites. And so just the very rumours of the appearance of UFOs had an effect and changed minds and made people think of things which hadn't been thought of for generations, such as places of ancient magic and ritual. And then later on came the crop circle phenomenon, which again emphasized the link between the mysterious, the crop circles themselves, and ancient sites, because there's often a very strong topographical connection. In other words, they appear in the vicinity of ancient sites, and Stonehenge has been visited year after year by crop circle formations. And Avebury and that sacred country around Avebury, once a priestly landscape around Avebury, has been really the focus of the whole phenomenon. And that again seems to be affecting minds, leading people to think of things, it's stirred up minds and changed patterns of thought, and given people a lot of interest in life and a lot of enthusiasm. And it's like a reveille, a wake up. Well, Carl Jung said that UFOs were portents of change and agents of change, and that seems to be very much confirmed. That we certainly, the way of thinking today is very different from how it was 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah, so that was a lovely piece again from John. And one of the other things with the Michael line that always fascinated me, and John was very much champion of Kathleen Maltwood and also Mary Kane, who I think he became friends with, and there was a connection with that, which I think he brought up a couple of times and kind of drew my attention, because there's multiple Zodiacs across Britain. This is something that Anthony Thorley's been working on. He did a brilliant lecture back at Megalithomania in 2010. Since then, Yuri Leach and Paul Weston and others have produced some fantastic books and documents about this. But one of the things that grabbed me was the fact that many of these, including the Glastonbury, also the Nothamsted Zodiac, which you can see on the right, which is up here kind of in Hertfordshire going into East Anglia, the Michael line appears to clip the top part of it, and it actually clips the part of Aquarius going through Glastonbury. And it also actually hits the, obviously it goes through Glastonbury Tor, but it also goes through Borough Mump again, which we mentioned earlier. And this is the nose of the dog, the girt dog of Langport. And there are traditions of wassailing in that area where you throw apples into the River Farret, where the nose touches next to the Mump, Borough Mump. And which, you know, they go back ages talking about this dog feeding the dog at the mouth of the dog. So that's very intriguing. One of the things that was discovered about a decade or about 15 years ago was this. This is linked as a friend of David Hatfield's, that suddenly realized, actually, if you use the certain maps, you can see clearly this kind of horse or unicorn in the landscape, which overlays the dog. Now, there's lots of symbology and meaning in that, which we won't go into, but I think John would have really appreciated this as part of this system, because now the Michael line would go through the third eye, the borough mump of the unicorn, as well as the nose of the dog. Okay, we're now going to talk a bit about the whole Megalithomania aspect, the conference, and also the book. And it was really when I met John Martineau, probably back in around 2004, 2005, that I then was able to meet John Michell, and I met John Neal, Robin Heath, Robert Temple, all these luminaries who I'd been reading books on for years. And we kind of got together. I started working on the Earth Grids book with John. This came out recently, Megalith Studies in Stone, a couple of years ago, which Robin and I and John collaborated on, amongst others, and Howard. And since then, you know, obviously the Megalithomania book I'd read previously. John Martineau republished it, I think in 2006. And this is when we kind of put our heads together, me, John, and Gareth, to actually put the conference on. And we're going to talk a bit about the conference, because there's quite a few little stories associated with John, which people might remember or appreciate if you weren't there. But before we do, we have John actually talking about what Megalithomania really is.
Megalithomania is one of those interests which, when you get it, it can lead in any direction. It leads people on to measure all aspects of ancient science, ancient surveying, ancient astronomy, and then the ritual and magic behind it all. But I really wanted to show a lot of the pictures, a lot of the art has been inspired by megaliths and antiquities. So it's really based around that. And then with a few of the characters who've sparked off outbursts of megalithomania at different times, beginning with William Stukeley in the 18th century, who got everyone talking about druids, and a lot of people jaunting around the country looking for antiquities. It's when a sort of consciousness of our ancient past, which had been very much suppressed and forgotten, when it came out again. And these things come in bursts, it seems. There's another one at the beginning of last century, about 1900, when Sir Norman Lockyer, the astronomer, investigated ancient sites and ancient temples from an astronomical point of view, and discovered their alignments to certain stars and certain positions on the horizon in connection with astronomical events. And that also got a lot of people very excited and enthusiastic, and got people spending time at night watching for the moon and such over certain stones, and then also becoming interested in the rituals associated with these practices. Because we're looking at societies which were very heavily ritualized, and their rituals were key to the seasons of the year and the astronomical events which mark them. So it was like a round of ritual, and of course music and such, much of which is lost, but not beyond reconstitution to some extent. Certainly when you become aware of the extent of the ancient remains and the prehistoric sites and shrines and such over Britain, it does of course affect your view of where you are greatly enriches the experience of walking and exploring the country. And who knows, puts you in touch perhaps with past minds, past thinking, and past. You can only do so because when you're in contact with something, it affects your way of thinking, way of looking at things. Because when I was first interested, no one was particularly interested in stone circles, but yet going to see a few of them, like in Derbyshire in the north of England, I kept finding little parties of people who come there and were looking around, not quite knowing why they come. I think I didn't know why I'd come really either, but we seemed to be just interested in going to these places. And I think that the news of that spread to America. In those days, in early days, a lot of American tourists and investigators came over to see the antiquities of Britain. And I suppose in these islands we've got probably a larger range of prehistoric sites than anywhere in Northern Europe, including some of the main monuments, Stonehenge and Avebury and such. Avebury being the central temple of southern England. Well, in the late 1960s there was another revival, beginning really with the rediscovery of some characters who'd been around 30-40 years earlier. Alfred Watkins, the lay hunter, the beginner of lay theory, and Admiral Somerville in Ireland, the naval surveyor, who made these same discoveries that Lockyer had also made earlier about the astronomical bearings of stone circles and ancient stones, making them all to be one system rather than isolated sites. The archaeologists then were working on them individually as being burial sites and looking for what they could find there. There's not very much archaeological evidence of stone circles, so they were rather neglected. It wasn't until we began to realise that they're all connected with each other and contribute to making a symbolic or sacred or ritual landscape that the thing became really interesting. And that sparked off, I think, a large popular wave of interest in prehistoric past. And it coincided with the hippie times when all kinds of new ideas were going around and people were thinking idealistically about the past and the lessons of the past for the present.
So in 2006, we put on our first conference over Beltane, and we had something like 17 or 18 speakers. John and I and Gareth just went for it. We invited everybody, and we had an absolutely fantastic time in the assembly rooms. John gave a lecture on the old stones of Land's End, and we recorded the audio of that, and you can listen to that online. That's on YouTube, and it's absolutely wonderful lecture. We don't have the visuals for that, but we do have a few photos, as you can see here, from the conference. And we also, this is again John sitting outside the front, is also in the photo on the right there. And he joined the panel along with many of the other speakers. You'll probably recognize these youngsters all sitting together on the stage there, including Sig Longren, Andrew Collins, Michael Glickman, Robin Heath, Nicholas Mann, and you got John over on the right there hosting the panel, much like he's going to do today. And it was a really successful conference. We filled up the assembly rooms. Everyone had a fantastic time, and that really made us think, well, we should do this every year. This is a really wonderful idea, and people, appreciate it. We got a lovely review by Merrily Harper in the Fortean Times. And they gave an overview. We've got a great photo of John there as well, and that really triggered, the beginning of what we're here doing today. John was also involved in some of the festivals we were putting on. Myself, Sean Kerwin, Stuart Mason, who's pictured on the right here with John. We did a lot of festivals at the Sunrise Celebration and the Big Green Gathering. I was doing this before Megalithomania originally. I know Robin was coming to speak at some of them, and John came to the first ever Sunrise Celebration and gave a lecture there alongside people like David Shaler, the ex-MI5 whistleblower, and Giles Bryant as well, who filmed that interview. People like Peter Knight and Jeff Stray and others came along too. And again, that was a fantastic event. John had a good time there. He was like going back into the late 1960s. And we have a couple more. He came to the next year's event in 2007 as well. You can see Susie there, actually Susie Martineau with Stuart Mason all banging some drums in one of our marquees. And then we had the 2007 conference. This was where John presented his lecture called Megalithomania, looking at the different aspects of how basically themes within the book and some of the things he just talked about in that part of the interview. We had a fantastic lineup, including Keith Critchlow, the late Keith Critchlow, who gave a fantastic lecture using 2 screens up on the stage. Paul Broadhurst as well. It was fantastic to have him there. We're hoping to invite him back over the next couple of years. Anthony Murphy, it was his first appearance there as well. and yeah, Robert Temple, and everyone thoroughly enjoyed it. And again, you can catch up the audio of that if you want to hear that particular lecture, because it was quite wonderful. And yeah, and we have a few photos from the conference there. And John also, as part of that conference, we did a trip down to Stonehenge on the Monday, and we got a few photos of him. And look, he just happens to be holding a copy of Megalithomania in his hand on the left there. And one of the other things we did that day was some bards came along, some druidic bards. And this is something that we did at the early conferences, but John actually kind of encouraged us to do that. There's these bardic trials that take place in Glastonbury every year. And we tried to kind of link together with them and try and do the conference on a day that they could join us. And they actually joined us at at Stonehenge one year. And so one of the things we did do the first few years when it was convenient was actually have the bards come along, and in the evenings we would have them perform their poetry, their insights and music. And we've got a picture of Tim Hawthorne here, who's actually playing to our group at Stonehenge on that particular day. We also had John join us in 2008. He came onto the panel. He wasn't available, I believe, during the weekend, but he came in the Sunday evening. And this was the last time he appeared at Megalithomania. We had David Hatcher Childress come over from America for this, and Hamish Miller as well, who gave a fantastic lecture about his newer research at the time on New Zealand. Howard, it was the first time I think Howard came to the conference. He may have came next year instead. And even Kate Masters, she did a lecture as well. How about that? So we had a fantastic time there as well. We've got a few photos of John and some of the speakers up on the stage with Howard. And again, we've got John Martineau hosting the panel. And I had a chance to go and visit John once or twice at his place in Notting Hill. And here's a photo of him and me. And this is actually a certificate that was given to him by Stuart Mason, because Stuart Mason was the head honcho of the Antiquarian Society that he founded. And John became an honorary member, like several of us did, and myself and Stuart went to kind of present him with that, because I was part of the Antiquarian Society when it was happening. And on the left there, you got a photo of John actually in his place, and also of his place, I think. And one of the things he did, he came down to Brighton one year and did, I think it was called the Antiquarian Society Bonfire Talks Conference. I know John Neal came to that, and I think we had Robin Heath and a few others speak there. And there's John up on stage at the conference there. And this would have been, I think, in 2008 or late 2007. And one of the incidents that happened there was on the right there, you got Judith and John looking out the window at the sunset on this beachside restaurant in Brighton. And John decided to roll one up, if you like, and light it in the middle of the restaurant. We were literally sitting on the large tables in the middle, and just smoked the whole thing. And no one, the waiters were just looking around at each other and wondering what to do with this sort of this older gentleman. Do we tell him off? He didn't care, and he tried to pass it to all of us as well, which was quite a story. And some of us were starting to panic a little bit. John didn't care. He just carried on. It was the next Megalithomania we did was actually a tribute to John, because he died in 2009, just before the Megalithomania conference. There was a wonderful tribute put together by John Martineau, Steve Marshall, and many others, friends and close associates and colleagues of John. And that was really quite beautiful. Christine was there as well, John Neal, and many others. And since then, I've been personally, one of the books that was kind of, I think, came out around that time or about a year earlier was The Measure of Albion, which was a collaboration between Robin Heath and John Michell. And this book really changed my perspective on kind of understanding the ancient people of Britain. And John pretty much wrote half of it. Robin wrote the first half, and they took some of John's ideas and Robin's ideas and just condensed them into this, what I consider a masterpiece. And some of the analysis on Stonehenge, on the Geodesy, the alignments, and the metrology specifically were quite a revelation to me, and this is what sort of took me in another direction. And so this is why I'm so fascinated and delighted to have people like Robin Heath, Howard Crowhurst, John Martin are giving lectures at our conferences, because this to me is the kind of real deep hidden mystery of what these sites and landscapes are all about. And here's just a clip of John, and he's just talking about some aspects in that book relating to Stonehenge and Avebury.
We've always gone to Stonehenge, and it's always in, when you see it in paintings or in stories, it's always something spooky and weird and elemental about it. That's how artists see it. So perhaps there is a natural attraction which makes people come to this site. When they get there, often what should we do? What should we do? They take photographs and such, but I think there's attraction, and then perhaps the expectation is not fulfilled. It's like it leaves a yearning or something, or desire to know more, perhaps. But it's fun, isn't it, that Stonehenge, which is not itself well, it's in a somewhat undramatic spot on Salisbury Plain, a flattish area, not marked by anything particular. It seems to me it was placed by surveyors, or it's part of a very much larger system of monuments. Because the site doesn't seem to have any particular picturesque or spiritual qualities. It's just that spot where it has to be, for scientific or for reasons perhaps, to do with surveying and with astronomy. Although the tradition was that they were moved there by Merlin the magician, and there's quite a lot of those traditions where great stones were moved by forces now unknown or methods now unknown, and perhaps that was so. Perhaps there was a way of moving stones by polar magnetism or some force now unknown. We shouldn't be surprised by unknown forces. After all, our physicists, with their string theory and such, have to postulate endless unknown forces, even different dimensions. They do it with a straight face. And what's interesting about Stonehenge really is its position. It's exactly a quarter of a degree south of that of the great temple at Avebury. And Avebury itself stands on that line of latitude, which is 360 over 7 degrees, or a 4/7 of the distance from the equator to the North Pole. And you get other monuments marking the other intervals in that measure. But Avebury is the one which really has the key position, and Stonehenge is exactly 17.28 miles, or a quarter of a degree south of it. And there's other aspects of its geographical position which are very interesting, which makes it a sort of fulcrum or centre or surveyor's mark for the whole of southern England, in fact, and further.
This is what he was just talking about here, the 360 over 7. And John, I think, discovered that. I mean, there's other people claim they discovered it, but I think John actually did. And this is, to me, this is a revelation as well. This is one of the most important kind of insights that he had. And also, I know that John Martineau also later kind of realized that the angles, sort of like two hidden corridors. John Martineau discovered this in 1996. These two unusual corners, which he realized were like hidden corridors, and the angles between them is the 1/7 of a circle, or 360 over 7. So the correlations and discoveries kept happening based upon John's original discovery. Obviously, Stukely's version of Avebury was kind of very, very interesting, something that John championed. And this is us actually at Avebury after a Megalithomania conference. I believe this was in 2009. And one of the other things that John was very interested in was the continuation of the traditional measures through Britain and different parts of the world. And he set up a society, the Anti-Metrification Board, in 1970 to oppose the adoption of the metric system, and he believed that the imperial system of measurement had ancient and sacred origins, which clearly has been proven now. And he wrote a paper in the radical traditionalist papers, A Defense of Sacred Measures, in which he laid out his opposition to the metric system. Later, he had more breakthroughs in this book, Ancient Metrology, which I think is a limited edition to about 500 or so copies. And this is absolutely mind-blowing, in my opinion. And this with his good friend and also good friend of the conference, John Neal, Nosha, he's now taken it to a whole other level. But some of the discoveries about variations on the English foot were major breakthroughs at that time. And even Mike Parker Pearson last night when we had a Q&A with him was saying that one of the archaeologists based all his research on research that was published in this book relating to the foot. So we have John talking about this and the importance of the discoveries of Alexander Thom.
Alexander Thom in 1967 produced his first book, Megalithic Sites in Britain, where he postulated a unified unit of measure which was used in the layout of circles and megalithic sites from the very north of Britain, from the Orkneys and the Shetland Islands right down to Brittany, and then on the western seaboard of Europe, where megaliths are most concentrated in traditional Celtic areas. Well, there seems to be there was evidence of it. Well, there seems to be from the evidence of the monuments themselves to be in a culture which extended down the western seaboard of northern Europe. And Thom suggested that by his surveys of the circles, he postulated a unified measure which was 2.72 feet. He quite rightly used feet because the meter was unknown in the past, of course, whereas a foot was actually the basic measure. And this unit was established by statisticians, and it's been disputed by other statisticians. In fact, there was a whole range of ancient measures, and Alexander Thom insisted upon the megalithic yard of 2.72 feet or thereabouts. But when he came to Stonehenge to prove it, he didn't find it there. So it remains controversial. That's a field which there has been a lot of progress actually in the analysis of ancient measuring units. And the megalithic yard itself is probably what John Neal, the metrologist, calls a step, which is it's one step, the average step. But there were many different units, and the one that we call the step or the megalithic yard belongs to something which is called the Belgic foot, which is known to archaeologists. So there is a background to the megalithic yard, but no one quite knows if it was a basic measure or if it was just maybe a subsidiary measure. It's certainly not the main unit used in antiquity. No, some places, as I say, it was a statistical result of analysing the diameters and circumferences of a whole range of circles which Alexander Thom surveyed. He hoped that Stonehenge would be the sort of would put the matter beyond doubt, but actually it only made it more controversial because there's no very clear evidence of that unit in Stonehenge. And the inner diameter of the big circular stone of Stonehenge is 100 feet of the Roman foot, so-called, 97.32 feet. And it includes all other measures in it, but no very clear reference to any megalithic yard.
One of the other aspects that John doesn't the influence spread far and wide is his sort of ideas about earth energies and telluric currents. He wrote about these back in as far back as 1967. in a magazine about called Lung Mei and the Dragon Pass of England. It was briefly mentioned in the Flying Saucer Vision, but really came through in the view over Atlantis, where he realized there's a lot to do with the magnetic phenomenon that you find naturally arising from the earth, and how the religious scientific elites traveled the country, possibly the world, constructing these monuments, bringing and manipulating these energies to link up between them. And he believed it was really to do with like enchantment, like the enchantment of the landscape, he called it, where it created this kind of energy around the whole land, the whole area, where people would just feel healthier, more enlightened, crops would grow better. Yeah, and it had a profound effect on every living thing within it, including your consciousness, which was raise your level of consciousness. He discussed this in The View Over Atlantis and in The Earth Spirit. But recent research, and he went into quite detail about this as well, looking at the feng shui systems of China and other places, and also the Western tradition of geomancy. And since then, there's been various research has been done by people like Philip Callahan, Alana Moore, and more importantly, John Burke, who co-authored the book Seed of Knowledge, Stone of Plenty. And these idea of these energy lines, for example, here, like moving through Avebury, actually, and magnetism being part of this, John Burke found that he with serious scientific testing, he was able to detect these energies and record it scientifically multiple times. And he proved much of what John Michell was talking about back in the 1960s and 70s. The interesting thing is John Burke was part of the BLT research team, who were originally researching crop circles, another one of John's interests. And the reason they decided to start studying this scientifically, this link with ancient sites and megaliths, was because in crops they've kept finding these strange anomalies in the nodes and in the crops themselves, and in areas where crop circles had formed. The next year, crops would grow abundantly exactly where the crop circle had been the previous year, as though something had happened to the earth there, and it had stimulated the soil and the seeds. And through further testing, they found that this was certainly the case. And this is an electrical resistivity map of Stonehenge, and it shows you where electric current, like the telluric currents of the earth, and this kind of jumps around and is the opposition of magnetism. They found that within Stonehenge. They found it within Avebury. I mean, in Avebury itself, the stones they tested all the stones in the circle, and all of their magnetic souths were oriented to each other, as though the builders knew that they wanted to create a large circle of stone where all the magnetic elements were pointing to one another, so it would stimulate some kind of movement of energy around the circle. And when it goes into the avenues, Avebury, it would go, the alignments between each stone, the magnetic south would go dead straight along the avenues. So these are the things that John was implying in his early work, intuitively, and looking at the old traditions. And throughout the years leading up to the work of John Burke, really John and his early work really stimulated a generation of people, including myself, to get out in the land and try and detect these kind of energies, these earth energies, to kind of have some kind of experience there, to have like a revelation. And I've had various personal experiences thanks to reading John's books. When I went to St. Michael's Mount, for instance, down in Cornwall, I went into the crypt there and I was filled with light, and the whole room filled up like something strange happened. I had a similar thing when I first ever went to Glastonbury tour. I went up there and had this kind of profound effect on me. And for 10 days afterwards, I was almost like in a meditative state. And so these places do have an effect. And this is something John always talked about. Now, we have the science to back this up. Even light phenomena being recorded, and the fact that now they're able to detect magnetic anomalies in the ground much better. They've proven that many of these sites are built for this purpose, and it could also be why they chose these particular types of stone and moved them, perhaps the blue stones, Stonehenge, from Wales to Stonehenge. And so, there's a lot more to this than meets the eye. And here's some more research. These were some extra research that was carried out by John Burke. So, with all this in mind, it's just worth considering that these are just some aspects of not just the revelations of John Michell, but the influence he has even into the present day. And many, many authors who, if you read their books, they won't mention John Michell. They'll mention other people who were influenced by John Michell. And you won't even get a mention in these modern books. But knowing all of John's early work, you see the influence in all the work, all the books, research, and revelations other people are having. And he really was way ahead of his time. So it was an absolute honor to actually meet him a few times, to have him involved in the creation of the Megalithomania conference. And today I'm still rereading his books and getting much from them. So I'm going to leave you with a final clip of John. And he's, because we're at the Megalithomania conference, this is him talking about stone circles.
Stone circles certainly focuses of local ritual. Probably have many functions to do with with the different kinds of public assemblies. But of course, there's so much mystery still to be, mysterious aspects still to be explained and discovered around stone circles. I'd say that the folklore of stone circles is not really very rich. There are traditions of assembly. Stonehenge, of course, was said to be a place of healing. All the stones are said to have magical healing powers. But whether that's anything to do with the original story or the original use, or whether it's these are later customs and ideas, no one really knows. I like to think that there's a tradition going right back to unbroken tradition in some places. As archaeologists, I think have emphasised the the burial, the funerary aspect of stone circles, as well as the earth mounds and stone mounds, because the biggest evidence you can find of ancient life is of burials. So they've rather concentrated on the cremations which have been found in stone circles, sometimes in large pottery jars, like so in Cornwall, where museums are full of funerary urns taken from burials in and around stone circles. But just like a church, it has a burial function, but it's not its main function. So I think stone circles became the focuses of burials, perhaps of certain people. And that's I suppose is a secondary aspect of these monuments. Many of those astronomer archaeologists have discovered, they do all seem to be at places where the positions of the heavenly bodies at certain seasons form certain patterns, or some way have a conjunction. So there's a mystical and perhaps a magical, as well as a ritual element in
So I hope you enjoyed that kind of view of John Michell. He was a massive influence on me. He's been a huge influence on generations of people. And I must thank John Martineau for introducing me to John and helping set up the conference, and also John Neal and Robin and Howard and others for inspiring me over the years. And yeah, it's been a real pleasure to share kind of how he's affected me and how he's affected others over the years. So thank you very much for listening. I really appreciate it. And if you have any kind of questions or anything, I can take a couple of questions, or we can save that for the forum. I've got one coming in, a question for Howard, so we can deal with that soon. So thanks everyone for listening. I do appreciate it.